So, I'm Allie of Manuma. This is
Mary Ruth Fields of United Sewing and Design.
United Sewing and Design. So I gave you guys a heads up yesterday about our video chat today. Right now we're at Real Art Waste in Hartford, and we just took a tour through the exhibit Abductions and Reconstructions, which was curated by David Borowski. He's a local curator. He does a lot of shows here at Raw. And we're gonna just discuss like our impressions in the realm of design and upcycling and sustainability, which is key to both of us in our design process and the businesses that we're building as social enterprises. So, do you want to start with just like your quick impression?
Sure. One of the reasons that I came to see the show was because I use repurposed materials in both my artwork that could be considered to be non-functioning, it only functions to give beauty and hang on the wall, and the pieces that I make and that my collaborators make with me, which is of repurposed textiles. So oftentimes I think a lot about the previous life that object or that material had. I think that's one of the things that really draws me to using repurposed materials is the fact that they had a previous life.
Mm-hmm. There's a narrative to it.
Right, and sometimes I imbue it with what I think the previous life might have been, and sometimes I know what the previous life might have been, and then I think, how does that inform this thing that I'm making? So sometimes I'm just making things to use out of materials that are just taken from the waste stream, so they don't really have a backstory of much. But then the artwork that I do, the materials have a lot of backstory. And so I wanted to see what these artists were doing with their materials and how that informed their artwork, or if it informed their artwork. So what was your reason for coming to see the show, do you think?
Yeah, similar reasons. I think it's really important whether you're doing fine art, which is not functional, or if you're doing applied art, which is, maybe more of a commercial product. I think it's really important at this point in, civilization, industrial history, to talk about where the materials come from in terms of provenance. We talk about provenance, and that gives a certain cachet to antiques, fine arts, things like that. And so if we can imbue that same sense of luxury, exclusivity to current contemporary fine art and commercial products, I think that's going to help to bring that making process out of this idea that we've kind of been imbued with in the 20th century. I think from the Depression and the classism that's really like rampant in American society, where like if you're reusing something that already had a life cycle, that's less valuable rather than more valuable.
You mean the thing that you make is less valuable, or the material is less valuable, or both?
Both,
right.
I think.
So you think there's still kind of a stigma attached to reusing things?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, what I hear a lot, and maybe you hear the same thing, from a lot of people when you talk about upcycling, is that it's not really art, it's not really fashion, it's like crafty, and like craft is used as like a slur. So
yeah.
But then you have people like bidding thousands of dollars on pre-owned, which is what antiques are,
right.
Like furniture, for example,
right. And
or a famous artist's like bedroom slippers. I don't know.
Right. Well, you're right. I mean, provenance, as long as it's a particular kind of product, means a lot more than when it's another kind of product.
Right.
Yeah.
But they exist on the same continuum in my
Right.
mind, and
Right.
so.
Well, when you look at someone like Robert Rauschenberg, I mean, he was constantly repurposing things, and I mean, it did take a long while for people to think that an Angora goat with a tie around its middle on a piece of plywood was art. But now it's just generally accepted. You know, I mean, we can't all put our bed up on the wall and call it art, you know, or can we? So, you know, it's not like people have never seen materials repurposed as artwork. So, yeah.
It's you know, it's problematic, and I think that's an opportunity for us to like keep working at and find ways to communicate the cachet and like again the value that's inherent in materials, whether they're
Right.
have already had a life or if they're, you know, if they're brand new, and you know that backstory like is an added benefit rather than something that is like a downgrade. So
When it comes to the materials, I have to say that I really enjoyed the pieces in the show, but I would have preferred to see something more about two of the artists who were using, obviously everyone was using repurposed materials, but two of the artists did not have any artist statement.
yeah, so let's quickly I didn't mention this before, but the show is called Abductions and Reconstructions. And the three artists are Meg Hitchcock, Ryan Sarah Murphy, and Liz Swibel. And again, it was curated by David Borowski. I'm not sure if in the title of the show, if abductions, if that means like I'm abducting you,
Right.
like that kind of abduction. In my mind, actually, first, because of my previous work, I was thinking in the medical sense, like abduction is like separating body parts. So I think if you think about it in either sense of the word is kind of interesting, and it gives it like a different sense. But yeah, unfortunately, there's an artist statement only from Meg Hitchcock here, who had a large wall installation of pieces around her exploration of Catholicism and the Buddhist mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, which is a really beautiful, I thought, installation. But,
Yes, yeah.
Were you going to say something about
the
materials?
Yeah, the quality of the materials that she used was very closely maintained. There wasn't a slip of the pen or the string or the things that she was burning things with. Every hole was, you know, completely the same diameter. All the letters were very carefully crafted and applied, and you could see that because a lot of the pieces had repetition in them, and every single letter was the same letter in the same spot, and so everything was very meticulous.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I really did appreciate knowing her backstory and how important the exploration of spirituality to her was, and also the idea of, you know, what is the purpose of moving through a spiritual practice, and how much does it really mean? Does it really affect your closeness to God or not? Is it all futile? And I thought that, you know, when I'm doing artwork and I have to do something repetitive, a lot of times it becomes a freeing feeling, because the repetition puts you into this mind state where you can forget your surroundings and begin to really focus on what you're doing, and it often brings other insights into things that you may not have even been thinking of before. And so I was wondering if some of those concepts that she talked about and some of the things that she'd felt were come across when she was very carefully burning a hole or placing a letter over and over and over.
Yeah. I'm just scanning her statement to see if she speaks to that at all. You know, she does talk about how she found the concept of like sin and repentance to be similar between Buddhism and Roman Catholicism. Let's see, and then as far as her practice, I mean, that those concepts of like repetition, even like self-mortification,
Right.
if it's, you know, cutting, burning, yeah, I think, you know, just from what I know of both of those practices, and I'm sure in other, you know, in other religious practices that element exists. And she says, so the last line of her statement is, by the time I'd completed my 10,000 plus mantras, so she was reciting that Buddhist mantra while she was working. I understand. She says, I concluded that transcendence is often a form of escapism, and in the pursuit of perfection is as elusive as the God who embodies it. So she really did kind of like embark on this work as a meditative practice.
Definitely. And I think that showed. I thought her quality was really excellent.
Her craft quality, yeah, like you said, is so precise and so uniform. And I think in terms of, for me, I find a lot of times there's a tension between like fine art and applied art, and
Oh yes,
they
definitely.
look askance at each other.
Yes.
A
Yeah.
lot. But I think, you know, when we see a product like her installation, each individual piece in her installation, where the quality is so, the craft quality, the construction is so high, what I see, especially with a lot of like hobbyist fashion designers or crafters who are trying to build a business, particularly in using upcycled materials, that quality is not there. Like, I think some people think like, because I'm using an upcycled material, I can kind of let things go. And I really feel strongly that it's the opposite. I think that you're competing in the same space with products made from virgin materials, with, you know, mass-produced precision manufacturing. Your quality better be as good, you know, to compete in the market. Like, regardless of your materials, you're competing in the same market, and I think we need to look to, again, the quality in fine art and high-end commercial products to make sure that, you know, like, if you say that this, you know, crafting this jacket of upcycled wool took you 150 hours of hand stitching,
Right.
I hope you can get a good price for that, because someone can look at it and see that it's a high quality piece and your stitching is immaculate and the quality is as good and as durable and as beautiful and inspiring as a couture jacket, because that's what it is at that point.
Yes, definitely.
So it's not an excuse to sort of cut corners and like
Right.
slack off. So
Although, on the opposite end of the realm there, we have Liz Swivel's work, which is, you know, functions in the same way. It's artwork. It makes you have a certain feeling. It wants you to understand its aesthetic. It's perfectly viable as far as, you know, in the realm of artwork. But on the other hand, she's using materials that are not finely cut and not meticulously arranged in a visual way. I mean, she may have meticulously arranged them,
I'm sure.
but, you know, they're pieces of balsa wood with unfinished ends and, you know, things that are bent or crinkled or broken. But, you know, that's the aesthetic of that particular work.
Right. So to recap, in the exhibit, Liz Swivel has some two-dimensional pieces, which I think of as like thread sketches in like a vellum, kind of a translucent vellum, and then she has some 3D
constructions
pieces that are hung on the wall, and then some constructions that are, I think of almost as like architectural maquettes.
Yes, yeah.
They're like little 3D sketches that have a very like architectural feel.
Right, but you're making some really good points of what is quote quote worth it, to a client or a customer. Do people need to be educated about the qualities of something that makes a couture jacket? Or on the other hand, do they care? Or on the other hand, does their style prefer more the Liz Weibel types of constructions that are freer and less detail oriented and less meticulous, or have just a freer look about them, a less constructed and regimented look? Then that if you're talking about things that people are going to buy, what is your market, or what is your customer kind of looking for? But as far as art is concerned, it's free reign. I think that you can have just as much respect for something that's more deconstructed versus something that's more rigid.
Well, so I'm glad you just used that word deconstruction, because that's a very good point. Like, even so within fine art, like, not everybody is going to be drawn to the precisely constructed, collages and the very, immaculate, clean look. Somebody might be more drawn to a freer hand, a different like texture, like that depends. And we know like the same is in fashion. But if I'm looking for, a tailored jacket,
right,
like it better be tailored.
Right.
You know what I mean? If I want a jacket that has some personality and has some deconstructed elements,
right,
then that's a style, like that's a surface design. It still has to fit me, It
Right.
still can't like fall apart while I'm wearing it necessarily, unless that's what I'm going for. But so I think there's room for
I think
style
it has to do, it has to do with intention. Like
sure.
you were just saying, is the intention to be tailored? Is the intention boho chic? But when it comes, I'm like you. If I see a designer who is trying to look fitted and couture and evening wear, but doesn't get it because their construction is bad or their fit isn't careful.
Oh God! Or there's like a chunky hem in the middle of like a piece of satin.
It's painful.
It's painful.
Yes, to look at, and I don't mean it from kind of a snooty standpoint.
No, but there is.
It's just simply a lack of knowledge.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be that, or it's like, I'm sorry, but even if you're looking at a piece of satin and you've never sewn satin before, like A, maybe don't use satin, or B,
learn how to do it.
Learn how to do it correctly,
Right.
so that your hem isn't a glaring.
So I
thing.
think it has a lot to do with intention,
And I think it's like
your intention should be boho chic versus couture tailor.
And you should be able to execute
Right.
on it, which may
Exactly.
mean like you may need to learn more, or you may need to hire somebody to execute that piece of the project for you.
Right.
That's perfectly valid. Like, we know that happens both in fine art and in craft and in commercial work. Like, the whole industry is built on subcontracting and specialization.
Right.
So, but yes, there should be an intention. Like, if you have a certain effect going on with a hem in a garment, it better be on purpose and obvious enough that someone doesn't think it's just a crappy hem.
Right.
For example.
Yeah.
So, but then again, so to get back to like a deconstructed look, like we know, I can't think of, I can just say off the top of my head, like McQueen
Yep.
uses still to this day, even under, Sarah Burton and the Atelier, they still use a lot of elements of deconstruction. If you think of, and hopefully we can dig into this a little bit more, but if you think of Victor and Rolf,
Yeah.
they embrace upcycling
Right.
in a lot of their work, and even earlier, like the effect of upcycling without actually being, repurposed materials. So,
Right. Well, the whole punk aesthetic of ripping and abrading and it's. I used to merchandise a very high-end line of men's denim, and the more hand distressing was done on the pair of jeans, of course, the more expensive they got, because that was a lot of handwork. But the whole thing was of making the jeans have a life that you didn't have. You didn't work as a mechanic, but your jeans were worn by one. Yeah. And then you somehow got them.
You get like an instant backstory, like an instant
of
narrative.
Being a mechanic, right?
I love that.
So deconstructing is definitely an aesthetic.
Yeah.
But only
it's
if
on
you mean
purpose.
it to.
Yeah, for sure.
You need to do that. So what did you think of Ryan Sarah Murphy?
Okay, this is of the three artists, this is another. I mean, I really love them all, and I love how they all play off of each other. They have really distinct styles, really distinct materials. I think her work played off really well, had something a little bit different to say, but a lot of similarities with Liz Zweibel's pieces, because they, for me, Ryan Sarah's stuff was also very architectural feeling.
Right, and she was using it was almost all torn flat material, like cardboard or mat board or foam board.
Yeah, it's like assemblage.
And cut, some of it was cut.
Layered, corrugated cardboard. It looked like, packaging materials, like paperboard boxes, even old book covers that were disassembled and then cut and layered. So even, if you were looking along the wall to see the sort of the strata of each piece was also a really interesting angle to look at it for me. And then her, so the torn versus cut pieces that were layered in there, and the color work within each piece was also really interesting.
Yeah, it was very architectural, but again, I really would have liked to know more about the direct concept behind those particular pieces.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the surface differences, and the pieces had a real cohesion to them, even with the different textures, and I liked some of them were very energetic, some were very serene. So I was drawn to those more so than the Liz Zweibel.
Yeah, very different color palette. So I think, actually, now that I think about it, I'm always thinking about apparel when I'm looking at something completely different. But I think what would be really interesting would be to take a 2D image of Ryan Sarah's pieces and print it onto.
Right. Yep.
Even as a graphic tee, it would be fantastic and very cool looking. But even to do it on a bigger scale, where it's exploded onto
a full leaf dress.
Yeah, a matte, fabric would be really beautiful.
Yes, I agree.
I can always take something and say surface design.
Yes, make that into fashion somehow.
But too, and actually, on my Instagram just before we started, I was looking at Georgina Hooper's Instagram page for her upcycling and mending project, which is called Sustain, SU_stain, and she showed a slideshow of modeling garment construction with simple little origami pieces. So she showed an origami, those fortune tellers. Mm-hmm. So she showed one, and then she showed a garment that she was free form, I think, pleating and overlapping pieces. So using sort of the form of the origami like toy basically to design into an upcycled garment, I think was what she was going for. But it just, like visually the connection, I could see it'd be really interesting. Maybe we should try this. If we take an image of one of Ryan Serra's pieces and then try to model it in fabric as either a piece of a garment or like, overlaid to
Right.
get those same.
Interesting. Or just the
effect.
aesthetic of the layering and the cut versus the torn.
Mm-hmm.
In some of my art pieces, I'm always struggling with the way the cut looks
Yeah.
versus the way the torn looks.
Yeah.
I always mount my pieces on top of another piece of fabric so that you can see the torn edge of the paper, and it bugs me if it's not torn. So I'll even change the back of the work so that I can tear the material because I hate the cut look. So, why? What is, to me, it's like, what does the cut represent versus what does the torn represent?
Yeah.
And so she had, Sarah Murphy had areas of torn all in one composition or areas of cut all in one composition, and then combining the both. And I love that layering effect. So that whole idea, the process could be something we could put into apparel.
Yeah. And I think too, like for me, I'm always,
We'll just put everything into apparel because that's where it belongs.
yeah,
Hello.
the application of everything is apparel.
Apparel, absolutely. That's where everything should end up.
If I can't wear it, it doesn't matter.
Yes, exactly.
But I'm always trying to push myself. When you are trained academically as a designer, less and less so now, and at certain schools less than at other schools. But there's still this very like old school tradition of you must sketch,
Yes.
and then your sketch becomes the garment. And there is the tradition of draping, which is so much more spontaneous. So I think that gets to like, why do we prefer the torn edge, the deconstructed look versus trying to precisely cut something?
Yeah, because it has a statement, has a meaning.
Yeah, and I think also it's just more organic. It feels more natural. It doesn't feel forced, but not rising to
Yeah,
the
it's like you're
intention.
taking out the human component if you don't cut it, even though a human tore it.
Yeah, it's kind of both.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
Thanks for clarifying that for me.
that seems to be clarifying.
She's very good
things
at clarifying.
for both of us. Sometimes you gotta like talk it out, talk yourself through it. But I want to really push myself, as a designer, to get away from the page, because I find I have the tendency, I'm either stuck like trying to sketch something and then it looks very flat and it looks very 2D, not because I can't sketch, thank you, but because you're literally like representing a 3D moving garment,
Right.
flat in line and space. Whereas if you start from like a crumpled piece of paper, how do I then replicate that into fabric at a life-size scale?
Yeah.
And what does that do for your brain and your whole
Yeah,
process? How do you work?
I always skip sketching if I can manage it.
Yeah.
But it does help you work out problems beforehand. Although if I'm using or doing a drafted pattern, then I usually can visualize what the drafted pattern is going to look like, and so I'll fix a mistake then. And then I'll maybe do a muslin or leave extra fabric on the actual fabric so that I can cut something if I
Or
need to.
somehow, yeah.
But yeah, I always skip the sketching.
So I think, and that's,
I mean, if I was trying to convey something to a customer, then I definitely sketch something.
yeah, I think it's a presentation
Because it's a
tool
conversation.
as well.
Yeah,
and
it helps the conversation.
Yeah, it's
But
a
if
sales
I'm just doing something for myself or I'm doing something that's going to be produced later on, I skip the sketching and go right to the draping.
you go right to
Or the
draping.
pattern, flat pattern.
So that's interesting. I mean, so I don't own a dress form yet. And so that, necessarily I am often starting with a sketch, or I'm trying to just work out actually a flat pattern. And that's what I've been working on a lot over the last, year or two, particularly, when it comes to like zero waste construction, because if you can look at a length of fabric, it's basically a rectangle. So for me to be able to work out how can I
Not
create
waste.
a pattern
Yeah.
that is indeed using a length of fabric
Right,
from edge to edge.
right.
So that actually has been a fun challenge, a design, challenge. But yeah, I don't always want to work that way. I mean, humans have long done that. If you look at traditional garments from around the world, they are based
Bog
on
jackets.
the bog jacket, the sari,
Yeah.
the kimono, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all based on, hi, it took me hundreds of hours to weave this fabric, and you're damn right, like not
not
one
totally
inch of it
cutting
will
it.
be cut and thrown away.
Yes.
So, so I think, that has a long history, and I think it has a long future, but you don't always want to have a boxy garment that's standing away from the body.
Right, although it does seem to work well for Honey Fisher. So I think it's maybe boxy, but you have to pick the right fabric.
Yeah, if you look at her garment flats, or just the garments flat, there are plenty of curves. And I think that, it works because it is flattering. You can have the same garment with space for the body
Right,
on very different bodies, and everyone looks great in it, and that's,
right.
I think that's why she works, and I'm really happy to see that like younger customer is embracing her system.
Right.
And that you can tell like who is old school, because they still attach the Eileen Fisher line to a woman of a certain age with
Right.
like a little bit of a snarkiness, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, that is sad.
What else?
I think that's it.
We said a whole heck of a lot about
I think we
one
should do
room
another one.
of art. We'll definitely do this again. We're really smart, Mary Ruth. We have a lot to say about art.
Well said, Allie,
and
again.
fashion and business and sustainability. So I like this
We
concept.
spend a lot of time studying, so I think we should, and consuming information and thinking. So
and
I
doing the
definitely-
stuff.
Yes, I definitely think we should have more conversations,
Yeah.
for sure.
So you guys can look forward to that. More shows. Maybe we can talk about films or other stuff that we're learning and thinking about.
Yeah.
In the meantime, obviously, hopefully you've clicked the like button and you're following this Facebook page. I'm also on Instagram, manuma.style.
And I'm United
and
Sewing and Design. on
United
Instagram.
Sewing and Design with Mary Ruth is on Instagram. You can go to both of our websites, unitedsewingdesign.com, manumastyle.com. Please join our email lists, because that's where the good stuff is. I can say I love reading Mary Ruth's pieces. Do you publish the same stuff on your blog as on LinkedIn?
Yes.
So she writes really informative articles about fashion, business, and sustainability. So if that's how you geek out like I do, I can highly recommend her writing.
Why, thank you.
You're very welcome. And I am kind of across the board and all over the place with what I write about, but what I am doing going forward is previewing my original articles for Manuma on the email list. So you'll see that content in the email at least a few days, if not a week, before it goes live on the blog.
Oh, you also have your Patreon.
I have a Patreon for a tangential project called Poesia Gramínea, Thanks for reminding me about that. Which is a long-term project that is exploring post-consumer plastics, upcycling, and invasive plant materials. So I would love it if you would like to crowdfund that. There's special content for supporters, and some of those products that I'm developing will finally be available and for sale at some markets this summer. That's my goal. So thanks for that. Okay,
Bye for now.
We'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining us.